Welcome to stories so absurdly real that if you heard them in a bar, you would be absolutely certain someone was making them up for laughs. But no, this is real life where hold my beer culture exists as a basic instinct. Humans look at danger, nod with confidence, and then decide to upgrade the situation into a personal disaster. Things usually start out very promising, the classic let me show you how it is done. Logic is busy looking for its shoes, while ego has already climbed onto the main stage. These stories are not here to teach lessons, but they do set one clear expectation. You will laugh first, then pause afterward, because somewhere in between the laughter, you will realize you once thought exactly the same way. And that is the exact moment this book starts doing its job. Story 1. The Man Who Flew. Using a plastic chair, he did not want to become an astronaut. He just wanted to prove he was not as stupid as the neighbors said. The plan sounded perfectly reasonable in his head: one plastic lawn chair and about 1,000 helium-filled balloons. No permits, no calculations, and definitely no thought about how to get back down. He tied the balloons, sat on the chair, and smiled with the confidence of a man about to teach physics a lesson. Physics responded immediately. The plastic chair left the ground faster than expected, carrying a man who was suddenly learning that wind is a real thing. The ground shrank, so did the confidence. No steering wheel, no brakes, no plan B. Just a neat lineup of small bad decisions lifting him higher than he ever intended. Story 2. The Lawyer Who Accidentally Shot Himself in Court. In the 19th century, when the law was extremely serious and the concept of safety was, let's say, still loading, there was a lawyer determined to prove that a gun could absolutely go off by accident. The argument sounded reasonable enough right up until he decided to turn it into a live demonstration. In front of the judge and the jury, he pulled out his own gun, treating it like a harmless prop. At that moment, someone really should have said, "Hey, lawyers use words, not bullets." But no, with total confidence, he pulled the trigger and the gun immediately did the one thing it was designed to do. He shot himself right there in the courtroom, turning a legal defense into a history lesson. He later died from complications, leaving behind a very clear message. Sometimes the law can protect you from other people, but it cannot save you from your own spectacularly bad decisions. Story 3. One man did not press the button and the world kept existing. During the Cold War, the entire world lived under constant tension where one wrong beep could end everything. Inside a cold control room, an alert system suddenly reported that enemy missiles were incoming. The procedure was clear: immediate retaliation, no debate, no delay, because hesitating even a moment meant losing. The pressure landed on the shoulders of a duty officer, trained to trust machines absolutely and doubt human instinct. But that day instinct cut in. He looked at the screen, looked at the procedure, and had a very unheroic thought. Maybe the system was wrong. Instead of pressing the button, he chose to do nothing. No speech, no dramatic action, just waiting. A few minutes passed longer than an entire career. Then the alert was confirmed false. The world kept turning. The lesson sounds almost stupidly simple. Sometimes saving the planet does not require a button pressed just enough clarity to stand still. Story 4. America wanted to drop a nuclear bomb on the moon. During the Cold War, when tension was higher than caffeine levels, a military idea was born that sounded like a late-night comedy script dropping a nuclear bomb on the moon. The goal was not strategy and it was not science, but very straightforward: showing off power so the whole world would know who was the loudest. The logic was very American: if we blow something up on the moon, everyone will look up and be impressed. The small problem was that no one asked what happens after that. Radioactive dust, orbital debris, and the risk of ruining every future space plan were all filed under think about it later. Fortunately, a few more clear-headed brains spoke up. The plan was canceled not because of high moral standards, but because the risk was simply too stupid to accept. The lesson was very clear: showing off is already dangerous, and when you have nuclear bombs, it turns into a truly terrifying instinct. Story 5. The CIA and the $20 million cat. During the Cold War, the obsession with espionage was so intense that any idea sounded reasonable if it was presented with enough confidence. The CIA looked around and thought if pigeons could do it, cats probably could too. So they decided to surgically turn a cat into a mobile listening device, implanting a microphone, a battery, and an antenna directly into its body at a cost of around $20 million. The cat became the most advanced piece of technology in the neighborhood. After years of research training and very serious presentations, it was time for the first real-world test. The cat was released and headed toward the perfect target, two spies talking on a park bench. Then a taxi appeared. The experiment ended right at the crosswalk. No data, no victory, just a very difficult report to write. The project was quietly canceled. The lesson lived on genius and stupidity are sometimes separated by exactly one idea that got funded a little too well. Story 6. Pigeons guiding missiles. During World War II, when humans were racing to invent literally anything that might win the war, a group of American scientists came up with an idea that sounded like an after-work joke, training pigeons to control missiles. The plan was very serious in a very unserious way. The pigeons were placed in the nose of the missile watching a target screen and pecking continuously at the point they were supposed to hit. The wild part is that the system actually worked in laboratory tests. The pigeons stayed focused, reacted quickly, did not panic, and did not ask ethical questions. Technically, everything was fine. Psychologically, the military had to face one uncomfortable truth: if the launch button was pressed, the final responsibility belonged to a bird. So the project was officially recognized as clever and then quietly abandoned. The lesson was crystal clear. Some ideas are completely correct, it is just that no one is brave enough to sign their name on something that has wings and knows how to peck. Story 7. The government poisoned alcohol to teach people to stop drinking during prohibition in the United States. The era began with a very moral goal, making society more sober. When people kept drinking anyway, the government decided to upgrade the strategy from persuasion to deterrence. The approach was very direct: if you drink, you die, and if a few people die, the rest will learn. Industrial alcohol was deliberately poisoned with the belief that fear would beat habit. The small problem was that people did not hold meetings to read instructions before drinking. They kept drinking as usual, just with something far more dangerous and far more sketchy. The public response was very consistent, not quitting alcohol but switching to bootleg liquor. Death counts rose quickly while illegal alcohol operations made a fortune. The policy ended in collective confusion and very uncomfortable reports. The lesson was brutally clear: a stupid policy can cause death more efficiently than the thing it is trying to prevent. Story 8. One-third cake sells worse than one-quarter cake. In some very serious marketing campaigns, retailers discovered a truth that made mathematics want to take a day off. Cake cut into one-third sold worse than cake cut into one-quarter. On paper, one-third is clearly bigger than one-quarter. No calculator needed, no expert panel required. But in real life, customers see one-third and feel like they are getting less. The brain reads the number, the heart reads the vibe, and the wallet listens to the heart. One-quarter looks familiar, neat, and reasonable, while one-third feels like someone cut the cake while zoning out. The result is that consumers happily pay for a smaller slice as long as the number feels nicer. Marketers stared at the data and accepted a painful truth. You can be completely right mathematically, but if the customer does not feel right, you still lose. The lesson is very clear. Numbers cannot save people who do not want to understand, and logic almost never beats the craving for cake. Story 9. The molasses wave that killed people. In 1919, the city of Boston learned a lesson no school ever taught: something sweet can absolutely kill you. A massive molasses storage tank suddenly burst, releasing thousands of tons of thick syrup into a dark brown wave that flooded the streets. It sounds like a sugary fantasy, but the reality was a sticky nightmare. The molasses surged as high as a two-story building, moved faster than you would expect, and swept away houses, vehicles, and unlucky people who happened to be nearby. Molasses is not just sweet, it is heavy, sticky, and extremely good at trapping you like a fly in a glue trap. Anyone who thought free stuff was a golden opportunity quickly realized they were standing inside the most dangerous dessert in history. It took the city weeks to clean up, and the sweet smell lingered for years afterward. The lesson is very clear: free sounds tempting, but when it comes rushing at you at high speed, running is usually the better option. Story 10. Mailing a child through the post. In the early days of the United States Postal Service, everything was much more flexible, especially the idea of what could and could not be mailed. The law clearly stated that packages could be shipped by weight, but forgot to mention one small detail: whether children counted as cargo. Some parents noticed the loophole and came up with a budget-friendly solution: mailing their child to a relative's house. The child got stamps, there was a receipt, a postal worker even accompanied them like fragile goods. Legally, everything checked out. In terms of common sense, absolutely not. When the press found out, the public panicked mildly and the government rushed to fix the law at record speed. Not because children were getting lost, but because the idea had existed for far too long without anyone stopping it. The lesson was very simple. Legal does not mean reasonable, and sometimes the law needs to be rescued from human creativity. Story 11. The $400 Juicer and the Human Hand. A tech startup appeared under bright stage lights, glossy slides, and promises to change how humans drink juice forever. The $400 machine looked like it came from the future, talking about smart technology, clean experiences, and modern lifestyle. Investors nodded, the press praised it endlessly. Users took the machine home and started juicing. Very quickly they discovered one small but impossible to ignore detail: squeezing the juice packets by hand produced more juice. No electricity, no app, no startup philosophy, just the human hand. The truth surfaced when the internet ran experiments faster than the R&D team ever did. Investors shifted into professional silence. The startup explained its long-term vision, but the juice did not care about vision. The story ended in collective confusion and a very simple lesson: technology cannot save a stupid idea, no matter how modern it looks on the outside. Story 12. Selling the Brooklyn Bridge. New York once witnessed one of the most charming scams in history when a man looked at the Brooklyn Bridge and saw money instead of steel. He approached his victims with a very trustworthy manner, complete paperwork, and a voice as confident as someone who had been selling bridges his whole life. The trick went straight for greed, buying a massive asset at a bargain price, with promises of collecting tolls, making profit, and becoming an owner in a dream scenario. The victims listened and immediately felt smarter than everyone else. They signed papers, paid the money, and believed they had just done something others were too stupid to think of. The consequences were comically perfect. Some brought chains to claim the bridge. Some were escorted away by police for trying to charge passing traffic. The scammer had long vanished, leaving behind owners who existed only in their own imagination. The lesson was crystal clear. If a deal sounds too good to be true, you are probably not the customer, you are the product. Story 13. 1.5 million balloons and a disaster. Everything started with a PR idea that sounded completely harmless, releasing 1.5 million balloons into the sky to set a record and take pretty photos. The city agreed, sponsors smiled, kids clapped, and no one asked the very uncomfortable question: what happens after the balloons are no longer in our hands? When released, the balloons looked cheerful, festive, and magical for exactly a few minutes. Then the chain reaction began. Balloons fell everywhere, covered roads dropped into lakes, and drifted into airport airspace. Air traffic was disrupted because no one could tell balloons apart from unidentified objects on radar. Worse, people died because rescue teams could not reach them in time, blocked by balloons. An idea once labeled fun now appeared in accident reports. No one was laughing anymore. The lesson was very clear: an idea can sound harmless in a meeting room, but consequences always happen in the real world, and they never joke. Story 14. The vacuum cleaner that blows dust. The history of invention has seen many moments humans were extremely proud of themselves right up until they plugged it in and turned it on. One of those moments was the so-called breakthrough vacuum cleaners that were heavily advertised as devices that would change cleaning forever. In theory, it sucked up dust. In reality, it blasted dust everywhere like party confetti. Instead of making the room cleaner, the machine turned cleaning into a fair redistribution of dust across every surface. Dust lifted from the floor, flew onto the couch, jumped from the couch to the curtains, and finally settled right back onto the confused user standing there watching it all happen. The inventor insisted the idea was absolutely correct. The problem was just improper usage. The users realized they had paid money to make their homes dirtier faster than usual. The lesson is very clear. Not everything that produces wind noise and dramatic advertising counts as progress. Sometimes it is just failure with a power cord. Story 15. Executing a monkey because it was thought to be a spy. During wartime, when fear rises higher than reason, anything unusual can become a threat. In a very serious place, a monkey appeared by accident and was immediately assigned the role of a spy. No evidence, just allegedly suspicious looks and a collective imagination running at full capacity. Limited understanding mixed with wartime panic produced an unbelievable scenario. The monkey was put on trial. There were accusations, there were arguments, and there was even the solemnity reserved for a courtroom that should never have existed. Logic left the room early, fear took the judge's seat. The sentence was delivered and carried out quickly. When it was over, the only thing left was an extremely awkward silence. The lesson was clear: fear does not just make people lose reason. It can also turn completely irrational decisions into something that looks official and justified. Story 16. A pope put a corpse on trial. History once witnessed a moment where power decided to run far ahead of reason. A pope carrying deep resentment toward his predecessor chose a very thorough solution: digging up his rival's grave and putting him on public trial. The court was held with full ceremony, missing only one small detail. The defendant had been dead for a long time. The corpse was dressed in official robes placed before the court and accused with astonishing seriousness. The crowd was both shocked and curious, because it is not every day you get to watch a trial where the defendant cannot argue back or run away. Society buzzed while reason left early. Ironically, the man presiding over the trial was later overthrown by the very crowd and met an unpleasant end himself. The lesson left behind was cold power without reason does not create justice. It only turns madness into a formal ritual. Story 17. The mayor drank alcohol to save the city. A small city was living peacefully when it received an ultimatum from an invader delivered with dramatic flair: either surrender or play a very stupid game. The challenge sounded like it was invented in a bar: whoever drinks an entire barrel of alcohol gets the whole city spared. Logic immediately excused itself. No one thought this was a valid military plan, but no one had a better option either. The mayor stood up, looked at the people, looked at the barrel, and decided that today he would represent the liver of the entire city. The drinking became legendary in the most human way possible. Every sip was a prayer for his liver. The crowd held its breath, the invader laughed loudly, and somehow the barrel emptied before the mayor collapsed. The city was spared in collective disbelief. The lesson landed in a very strange way. Sometimes survival does not require logic, just one person reckless enough to try the dumbest option at exactly the right moment. Story 18. The woman who gave birth to rabbits. In the 18th century, when science wore long robes and egos were even longer, England witnessed a con so convincing that the medical community nodded along a little too quickly. A woman claimed that she did not give birth to human children, but to rabbits. Not a metaphor, not philosophy, but actual rabbits with ears, fur, and a special talent for making doctors lose their minds. Famous physicians rushed in, took careful notes, debated seriously, and instead of asking the simple question why, they focused on proving they were witnessing a groundbreaking discovery. Only when the story started to smell like straw and logic completely ran away did the truth come out. It was all an elaborate hoax. The woman was exposed, and the scientific world experienced collective embarrassment. The lesson is very clear: when scientific ego takes over, even the smartest people can end up believing that rabbits are just an upgraded version of babies. Story 19. Holding in urine to death out of politeness. The story begins very politely at a formal reception where manners are valued more than biological needs. The main character feels the familiar signal from the body, but the brain quickly shuts it down with the classic line, "It can wait a bit." The conversation drags on. Tea keeps getting refilled, and small talk stacks up like layers of glossy paint. Every passing minute, the body sends urgent warnings, while the ego replies with a courteous smile. Holding it a little longer for the sake of politeness sounds noble until biology decides it will no longer negotiate. The consequences arrive quietly but seriously when the bladder and related organs can no longer tolerate excessive social courtesy. People are left stunned because no one expects politeness to be that dangerous. The final lesson is very direct. Politeness is valuable but not worth dying for, especially when the body has been asking for a break for a long time. Story 20. Capturing a fleet with cavalry. The military plan sounded very grand. Enemy ships entering the bay, cannons, ready, maps spread across the table. Then the weather decided to join the meeting without an invitation. The wind changed direction, the water retreated quickly, and the mighty fleet became stuck like toys with dead batteries. The ships could not move forward or backward, just sat there waiting to be mocked. The army on shore looked at each other, then looked at the cavalry that was meant to fight on land. Someone came up with an idea that was very off the textbook: if the ships cannot sail, then ride horses out to capture them. And so the most absurd victory in history happened. Cavalry charged across the muddy bay. Sailors panicked and surrendered because there was no chapter on how to fight horses from a ship deck. No brilliant tactics, no ultimate weapons, just the weather choosing a side. The final lesson was very simple. Nature always gets the last word, and it does not care how many copies of the plan you printed. Story 21. A war started over soccer. Everything had already been tense, like a string pulled too tight, with economic hardship, political chaos, and everyone needing an excuse to vent. Then a soccer match appeared, advertised as pure sport. Healthy entertainment completely unrelated to any historical grudges. On the field were two teams. In the stands were millions of egos wearing the same colors. One collision, one controversial goal, and collective emotion ignited faster than fireworks. The shouting spilled out of the stadium, turned into protests, then into very real violence. Politics stepped in, the military was called, and an actual war broke out over something that was supposed to last only 90 minutes. The human cost became painfully real, cold, and without extra time. The final lesson sounds ridiculous, but true collective emotion, when it loses control, is more dangerous than any weapon because it does not need a reasonable excuse to pull the trigger. Story 22. Shooting friendly forces in the fog. The military operation was carefully planned on clean maps where every arrow went the right way and no one shot the wrong person. In real life, fog rolled in and erased all those neat boundaries. Communication became distorted, orders arrived late, and everyone believed they were standing in the correct position. Inside the white haze, a strange sound echoed, and the brain instantly labeled it enemy. Fighting broke out in chaos, gunfire erupting alongside a very familiar confidence shoot. First ask later, only when the fog slowly lifted did the truth appear: the bodies on the ground were wearing the same uniform. There was no invisible enemy, only panic equipped with weapons. The reports afterward used a lot of technical language to describe a very human mistake. The final lesson landed bitterly: the most dangerous enemy is sometimes not in front of you, but in how you react when control is lost. Story 23. The dog came back with the bomb. In battlefield desperation, the military came up with an idea that sounded very creative: using dogs to carry bombs toward enemy tanks. On paper, the plan was clean and confident. The dogs were carefully trained, ran in the right direction, and completed missions like four-legged biological devices. The problem was that real war does not look like a training field. When gunfire erupted, smoke thickened, and chaos took over, instinct stepped in as commander. The dog, instead of charging toward the target, did the most familiar thing in its life: ran back to the people who fed it. That moment turned a desperate military idea into a tragic consequence, fast, and without the need for further explanation. Later reports used plenty of technical language to describe a very simple mistake: humans forgot that dogs do not understand strategy. The final lesson landed painfully: you can train behavior, but you cannot control instinct, especially when it is running with a bomb on its back. Story 24. Losing a battle because of bees. The battle plan was prepared carefully, maps were clear, formations were tight, and morale was high, ready to die for glory. The two sides faced each other in tension thick as a pulled wire, everyone believing the outcome would be decided by strategy and courage. Then nature joined the meeting without asking permission. A beehive was disturbed in exactly the wrong place, and a third force entered the battlefield with one very clear objective: sting everyone. The bees did not pick sides, did not care about uniforms, and only followed their instinct to defend the hive. Within seconds, warriors turned into frantic dancers. Formations collapsed, weapons were dropped, and both sides ran away together in rare agreement. The battle ended with no winners, only bandages and very awkward questions. The final lesson landed gently: not every defeat is caused by humans. Sometimes nature just wants to remind everyone that it is also participating. Story 25. A submarine sank because of a toilet. A modern submarine is the peak of technology, where every button exists for a reason and every mistake can turn into a disaster. During a very serious patrol, all systems worked perfectly until someone needed to use the toilet. The problem was that a submarine toilet is not designed for improvisation. It requires the correct order, the correct pressure, and the correct person who actually knows what they are doing. One small step was done wrong with very everyday confidence. Immediately, seawater joined the process. Chemicals reacted, toxic gas appeared, and the control panel started to look like a technical horror movie. The chain reaction spread faster than any training session ever could. The submarine was forced to surface its position exposed, and the mission ended in uncomfortable silence. No one died because of the toilet, but the entire operation did. The final lesson was very clear. The more complex a system is, the less it tolerates someone who believes they understand everything just because they have been using a toilet their whole life. Story 26. Whipping the Ocean. A king who was used to giving orders and seeing everything obey decided that things should work the same way with nature. When his fleet met a storm, ships sank and planes collapsed, he refused to accept that nature could be so disrespectful. Instead of rethinking the situation, the king chose a very royal solution: punish the sea itself. He ordered his soldiers to line up along the shore and whip the waves as if the ocean were a misbehaving subordinate. Whips came down, water splashed up, and the sea continued to surge with complete indifference. The orders were carried out seriously, and the only result was soaked soldiers and history gaining one deeply awkward story. No wave apologized. No ocean felt afraid. Just a moment where human authority ran straight into reality. The final lesson was very clear: power may force people to bow, but it never defeats nature. Story 27. The 600-kilogram cheese in the White House. Everything started as a very sincere political gift: a massive cheese weighing over 600 kilograms sent to the White House to show affection and gain goodwill. The idea sounded warm, folksy, and extremely American. The problem was that no one thought beyond the handoff. The cheese was placed proudly in the White House and stayed there. 2 years passed. The cheese did not disappear, it evolved. The smell entered politics before the advisors did. Mice saw it as a long-term housing project. Staff were forced to coexist with a symbol that was very actively decomposing. Eventually, a decision was made to deal with it in a state of collective exhaustion. The ending was chaotic, exactly what happens when you delay addressing a problem that has been smelling for far too long. The final lesson sinks in. Political symbols sound beautiful on paper, but in real life they also smell. And if you do not deal with them early, that smell will enter history faster than any speech ever could. Story 28. The president who fought his assassin. The assassination attempt was planned with the very common belief that the elderly man in front of him would panic right on cue. The attacker rushed in, confident he was about to become a footnote in history books. But history decided to switch roles that day. Instead of collapsing or calling for help, the president reacted in a way no one had bet on. He grabbed the cane in his hand and struck back immediately. No speech, no slow motion moment, just the very human reflex of someone who had lived long enough to dislike being disturbed. The counterattack left the assassin stunned both physically and in terms of his short criminal career. The crowd froze, security rushed in after most of it was already over. The plot ended in total embarrassment. The story spread quickly because it shattered expectations. The final lesson was very simple: never underestimate an old man with a cane, especially when he has dealt with far worse situations before. Story 29. Stalin died from fear. In a regime where power was maintained through fear, people learned very quickly that silence was how you survived. Stalin built a system that was perfect in a twisted way. Everyone feared him. Feared each other, and even feared doing the right thing. When he collapsed in his private room, that fear worked exactly as designed. No one dared to enter, no one dared to call a doctor, no one dared to make a decision without orders, not even to save the life of the man holding absolute power. Time passed in loyal silence. When the door was finally opened, it was already too late. The death was quiet, not dramatic, just a lonely ending that perfectly matched the way he ruled. No enemies, no rebellion, just fear coming back to complete the circle. The final lesson is cold sow fear across an entire country, and in the end, you will die inside the very thing you created. Story 30. The train that was too big. A national project was introduced with very expensive words: modernization. Long-term vision: the future is coming. The drawings looked beautiful. The models were impressive, and the budget was large enough that no one wanted to look too closely. The train was completed in collective pride, shiny and fully ready for its debut. Then came the moment of reality testing. The train did not fit the tunnel. Not by much, just a few centimeters, but those few centimeters carried a price tag worth billions. It could not be pushed further. It could not bend. The train stood still and the meetings began running marathons. The solution sounded very gentle: fix everything. The cost of fixing the mistake grew faster than the explanations. The project shifted from a symbol of progress into a PowerPoint illustration for a painful lesson. The final lesson was very clear. A 1 centimeter error on paper can turn into a budget disaster in real life, and sometimes a measuring tape matters more than vision. Story 31. The Man Who Saved the World Without Knowing It. After traveling through 31 stories, one truth becomes clearer than any moral lesson. Human logic is more fragile than we like to believe. We have watched ideas that sounded perfectly reasonable in someone's head turn into real-world disasters, from plastic chairs flying into the sky, to military plans defeated by bees, to advanced systems collapsing because of one very confident mistake. Through all of this, the real hero turns out to be the person who did not try to be a hero. A single officer sitting in front of a nuclear warning screen, surrounded by procedures, pressure, and fear, did something that went against every manual. He did not press the button. No speech, no cinematic moment. Just a very human decision to wait a little longer. And because of that unplanned pause, the world stayed intact long enough to exist for another day. Looking back at all 31 stories, the problem is not stupidity, but excessive faith that our own logic is always correct. Plans always look perfect until reality walks into the room. Before this ends, it is your turn. Tell the dumbest story you ever survived, the moment where being just a little more wrong would have turned it into a dark anecdote. Because history does not survive only on brilliant plans, but also because sometimes someone is clear-headed enough not to follow them.